welcome to Fantasia, home of the Melodious. My name's Azallea, and today, gonna be bringing you guys another update to my Lyrilusc deck. So, without any further ado, let's just jump right into this. Starting off, we were playing with 3 copies of Lyrilusc Turquoise Warbler. So, Turquoise Warbler, if you control no monsters, you can special summon her straight from your hand, and then you can special summon a Lyrilusc monster either from your hand or from your graveyard. So, she's great for opening plays, but she's also really good for recovery plays mid to late game. So, that's why you play 3 copies of her. Okay, so the next card that we play is actually made so much better because Resize Starling is now in the TCG. We're playing 3 copies of Lyrilusc Sapphire Swallow. Now, Sapphire Swallow has a fantastic effect of if you control a Wind Beast type monster, you can special summon both this card and another level 1 Wind Beast type monster from your hand. And this allows us to swarm the field, especially if you already have Resize Starling on the field. This just allows you to get more monsters on the field. You could potentially go for additional XYZs if you have a Link monster up that allows you to do so. And this is just absolutely amazing, especially because a lot of the Lyrilusc monsters like Assemble Nightingale require multiple materials under it, not just 2, in order for it to gain more utility, right? So this card also has the effect where if this is used as an XYZ material for a wind monster, that monster gains the effect where when that card is XYZ summoned, you could target 1 Lyrilusc monster in your graveyard and attach that card to it as an additional material. So this is really good for, again, your Assembled Nightingale, where you want a ton of materials under it, so it gains more attack and it gains the ability to attack multiple times during each battle phase. So that's incredible. Okay, so moving on, we're going to the next card. The last Lyrilusc monster in the deck, 3 copies of Lyrilusc Cobalt Sparrow. Now, Cobalt Sparrow is definitely necessary at 3 because it is a searcher for the deck. So whenever this card is special summoned, you can add 1 level 1 Wind Beast type monster from your deck to your hand. And also, if this card is used as a material for a Wind XYZ monster, that monster gains the effect where it cannot be targeted by card effects. So that's absolutely amazing, especially because your Assembled Nightingale already has the innate ability to, if you detach a material from it, to protect itself from battle and by card effects. But now with the additional Cobalt Sparrow's protection effect, she is she cannot be targeted either. So it's just really nice overall protection for the card and for you to basically just stall out the game. Okay, so moving on, we're going to go into some of the other cards that I play alongside the archetype. So, of course, we're going to have to play 2 copies of DD Crow in the main deck. The third one's in the side deck. I found that 2 is decent enough, because 3 is a little overboard sometimes. You don't really need 3, especially because this hand trap is really only useful during the early stages of the game where you're disrupting your opponent's setup plays. Of course, if you have extra copies that you draw into later, you can always use them with your Sapphire Swallow or something else to swarm the field with and to make additional XYZs. But yeah, DD Crow as a hand trap is fantastic right now, especially because a lot of decks are playing with Destrudo, their field spell engines and things, so you can, if you hit that card, it's just absolutely amazing. You can stop a lot of your opponent's first turn setup plays. Okay, so moving on, we are playing a more recovery-based card, so we're playing 3 copies of Kinkabio. Now, Kinkabio, this card cannot be special summoned, but when you normal summon this card, you can actually target 1 level 1 monster in your graveyard, and then you can special summon it, but you have to banish it when this card leaves the field. Now, and of course, this card, being a spirit monster, returns to your hand during the end phase. But Kinkabio is amazing because it doesn't negate the effects of the monster that you special summon. So let's say you special summon Cobalt Sparrow, you can search for another monster, either your DD Crow, you can search for Sapphire Swallow, which can help you swarm the field even more. And then when you're making your XYZs, you can use whatever you brought back with the Kinkabio so that when Kinkabio returns back to your hand, that monster doesn't get banished. So it's just really great, and it's just a recurring tool for you to continuously make your rank 1s even after you've used your initial setup plays with Turquoise Warbler, Sapphire Swallow, and things like that. You can always just continuously bring them back from the graveyard instead of having to have them in your hand in order to make your plays. Okay, so that does it for all of the level 1 cards. Next, I'm going to move into the main engine that I play in this deck that helps accompany the archetype and covers its weaknesses, but also synergizes really well, especially with Recite Starling. So starting off, we were playing 3 copies of Fairy Tale Luna. Now, Fairy Tale Luna is more or less like a Magispectre Unicorn Kirin, which is absolutely broken. So Luna is fantastic because when this card is normal summoned, you can add another spellcaster type monster with 1850 attack from your deck to your hand, which includes other copies of itself. So once you have access to one, you're basically going to be able to thin out your deck and search out the other copies, which is pretty nice. But the main effect that we really want to use her for is during either player's turn, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls, and your opponent can either send one card with the same monster's name from their deck or extra deck to the graveyard to negate this effect. Otherwise, they have to return that card and this monster back to your hand. So it's absolutely amazing because of the fact that we play the Kaiju engine in this deck, and Kaijus work so well and synergize so well with Lyrilusc because Recite Starling can help you crash into them to inflict just lethal damage to your opponent. But not only that, but they're great removal for whatever your opponent's big threats are that your Lyrilusc can't attack over, because rank 1s are relatively weak and all of our main deck monsters are pretty low in attack points. So that's why the Kaijus definitely help. And so for the Kaijus, I'm actually running 5 different ones. I think 5 is enough. If you want to run more, feel free to do so, but I think this is a pretty decent ratio. So I'm running 1 copy of Gameciel. Again, you can run whatever Kaijus that you want. Just make sure you have a large variety of them that differ in attack points. And then I'm running 1 copy of Kumungus. I'm also running 1 copy of Godala. You can also run, Dogoron, Radian, and things like that. But also make sure that you're running these 2 Kaijus specifically. So you need 1 copy of Thunder King, definitely, because it's a 3300 attack point monster, and you need 1 copy of Jizukiru, again, a 3300 attack monster. Now, the reason why you want these large Kaijus especially is because not only can they act as a beat stick for yourself, but when you give it to your opponent, let's say you have no other choice but to give it to your opponent because it's the only one in your hand, it's fantastic for a Recite Starling to just crash into it, and then you inflict 3300 damage straight to your opponent, and which could potentially be lethal because people are playing things like Destrudo, people are playing which have their life points, people are playing the Solemn Brigade, some people are even playing things like Solemn Scolding, which just huge steep costs in terms of life points, and you can easily finish off your opponent if you have a well-timed Recite Starling crash. Okay, and the last monster that we play is 1 copy of Maxi, which is of course just great for getting us some draws and for deterring our opponent from continuing with their combos. So that does it for the monsters. Next off, we're going to go into the spell cards. Okay, so for the spell cards, starting off, we are playing with 3 copies of Mystical Space Typhoon. Now, this is in just this pretty staple removal. You can play Cosmic Cyclones if you want, but I don't really like paying too many life points in this deck, mostly because of the fact that you're going to be taking whatever damage that your opponent takes with the Recite Starling. So, if you're taking a lot of damage from your Kaijus, you may or may not be able to sustain multiple Cosmic Cyclones and things like that, but Mystical Space Typhoon gets the job done. It clears out field spells, clears out the 1 or 2 back row that people are playing, maybe the Solemn Brigade, so that you don't get your XYZ summons negated. So that's really why it's just there. You can also play Twin Twisters if you want, because you will have additional copies of like Luna and stuff in your hand that you could potentially discard, but I just like trying to maintain card advantage with this deck. So I went with the more economical choice of Mystical Space Typhoon. Okay, so the next card that we play is 2 copies of Swallow's Nest. Now, Swallow's Nest is pretty good in this deck, especially because we're running Instant Fusion, which means you can summon your Independent Nightingale straight from your extra deck using the Instant Fusion, and then you can actually tribute it off with your Swallow's Nest after you burn your opponent for 500 damage, and that way you can summon out your Cobalt Sparrow, and then you can go for a search, and then you can keep going from there, potentially searching out Sapphire Swallow, and then going off and making your rank 1 plays. So that's always why Swallow's Nest is really nice. Okay, so next off, in conjunction with that, we're also playing 2 copies of Instant Fusion. 1 copy is for the Independent Nightingale, which, of course, we don't really summon any other way. I don't play Polymerization or things like that in this deck, so really the only way you get it out is with Instant Fusion. And then the other Instant Fusion target is going to be Thousand Eyes Restrict, which is great removal. So you summon your Thousand Eyes Restrict, you take your opponent's monster, and then you can XYZ with your Thousand Eyes Restrict into whatever you need to at the time, and it just takes one of your opponent's monsters down with it, so that's why it's really great utility. And of course, you can always bring back your Thousand Eyes Restrict and things like that with your Kinkabio, and you can continuously remove monsters from your opponent's board and just control the game state to a pace where you can actually keep up with the game. Okay, so going into some of the mass removal that we play one copy of Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, and this card, of course, is just great with Kaijus. It wipes the board, and potentially next turn you can search out a Kaiju just by banishing it from your graveyard. So again, it's just for consistency's sake and for going second. This deck likes to go second, and so being able to clear out a lot of potentially powerful monsters with maybe built-in negation or protection and things like that is just incredible utility. We also play one copy of Dark Hole, again for the same reasons. We like going second, we like seeing board wipes. And to cap things off, we're playing one copy of Raigeki. Okay, and the last spell that we play, we're playing one copy of 1-for-1. Now, 1-for-1 here, of course, is just a staple in any deck that runs level 1s, right? Fantastic way of getting Cobalt Sparrow onto the field so we can go for our searches. It's just incredible utility, and you know, you could easily pay the cost by sending one of your extra Lunas or something else from your hand to the graveyard, and then you can potentially revive them anyway when you normal summon your Kinkabio and all that good stuff. So yeah, that does it for all of these spells. Next off, we're going to go into the trap cards. So for the trap cards, starting off, we were playing 3 copies of Harpy's Featherstorm. Now this card is just so broken, but there hasn't really been an archetype that could abuse it yet, except, well, Harpies themselves, but Lyrical Lucinia's come at a very close second. So if you control a Wind Beast type monster, until the end of this turn, negate any monster effects that your opponent activates. And this is just... that's it. That's all you had to do, is just control a Wind Beast type monster. And of course, Lyrical Lucinia is fitting that category perfectly. And of course, you having access to things like Assemble Nightingale, Resize Starling, very easily accessible quote-unquote boss monsters for this deck is just insane. You can just lock down your opponent's monster effects so easily with this card. So that's why I definitely like playing 3 of them. Okay, and for the last trap that we play, we're actually playing more effect negation. We're playing 3 copies of Solemn Strike. Now, the reason why I played this, because Harpy's Featherstorm negates the activations, but it doesn't, you know, destroy the monsters or anything. Solemn Strike allows you to control the board a little bit better by negating and destroying monsters when their effects activate. You can also hit hand traps with this, and you can also negate summons of extra deck monsters like Synchros, XYZs, Link monsters, what have you, right? So that's why Solemn Strike is a very good choice in this deck. You just have to be careful and manage your life points carefully, because again, you want to make sure that you have enough so that your Restart Starling can crash into your opponent, you do not lose, and then your opponent loses, right? You want to make sure that you have more life points than your opponent at all times. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind when playing this deck. So yeah, that does it for the trap cards. Next off, we're going to go into the side deck. Alright, so for the extra deck, starting off, we're playing 1 copy of DD Crow. This is our 3rd copy. Of course, we're main decking 2 of them. This is really only to side in if you find that you're up against a matchup where your opponent uses their graveyard very heavily. So against decks like Light Sworns, against decks like Infernoids, this is probably where you want to side in your 3rd copy. Okay, so the next card that we play is 3 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Ghost Ogre, again, a fantastic hand trap in this format. Can easily hit things like field spells, which are very prevalent in most decks right now, and it can just very easily interrupt your opponent's combos, and that's really the main point of it, is to interrupt your opponent's combos so they have to stop at a suboptimal point, and so that you can, of course, mount a comeback when it comes to your turn. Okay, the next card that we play is 3 copies of Denko Sekka. Denko Sekka is really good for this deck because of the fact that we're so vulnerable to things like Solemn Strike and Back Row and Disruption in general. So if you're against a deck like Paleozoics or things like that, which are seeing a fair amount of play right now in the format as a kind of rogue anti-meta deck, it's definitely good to be able to side for them, and Denko Sekka is definitely one of the best ways. So you might be thinking like Denko Sekka could conflict with your normal summons such as like your Fairy Tale Luna or your Kinkabio. Really, all those cards are fairly situational. You could always side out like a copy of Kinkabio or whatever, because Kinkabio is more of a mid to late game card where you're trying to recover from your resources from the graveyard and then go from there. Luna is really there for you to interrupt your opponent's fields, monsters, right, with your Kaijus. But Denko Sekka adds another element to your deck where you can control your opponent's back row as well. And because we don't really play too much back row besides Harpy's Featherstorm and Solemn Strikes, where you don't even have to set them all whenever you get them. You can also just maintain your resources. When they get rid of your Denko Sekka, then you can set your back row, or you can even just potentially side out all your back row in general when you're siding in your Denko Sekka, depending on what your opponent's playing. So yeah, just keep that in mind when you're siding in these cards. Okay, so the next card that we play is 2 copies of Moon Mirror Shield. Moon Mirror Shield is my little tech for this deck. If you've noticed, I don't play Stoic Challenge in this build. It's not really meant to be an OTK-based build. It's mostly for control, right? The Kaijus are there, the Luna's there, the Harpy's Featherstorm, Solemn Strikes. All of this stuff is to maintain control of the field, get rid of your opponent's resources so that you can overcome them slowly by poking at them with your Assemble Nightingale, poking at them with your Luna, or whatever smaller monsters that you have. And Moon Mirror Shield is just a really nice tech for those against those decks that like to swarm large amounts of monsters to their side of the field. You can equip this to your Assemble Nightingale, and then your Assemble Nightingale can just attack everything that your opponent controls, essentially, and you'll always have more attack points than them because of Moon Mirror Shield, and you can just clear entire fields if your opponent gets caught off guard. And it's just a fantastic way of recurring your resources. Again, Moon Mirror Shield, if it gets sent to the graveyard, you can always pay 500 life points and put it on the top of the bottom of your deck. You can even equip it to cards like Fairy Tale Luna, and then Luna can run over some cards on your opponent's turn. Luna can bounce something that your opponent has. So it's just a fantastic utility card, especially because our main deck monsters are so weak. Okay, so moving on into some of the traps that we side, we play 3 copies of Stormy Mirror Force. Again, our monsters are relatively weak, so if our opponent's trying to attack into us, most of the people, if they're smart enough, they'll actually attack into your Assemble Nightingale every turn, just so you have to waste a material to protect her from destruction. Stormy Mirror Force actually really helps, because people are very tempted to try to get rid of all your Assemble Nightingale materials, so they can start dealing damage to you. But Stormy Mirror Force just says no. If your opponent overcommits to a field, you can just clear out everything that they have and just easily go and poke them on your next turn. It also has a lot of synergy with Kaijus, because if you give your opponent a Kaiju and you don't have Luna to potentially bounce it back to your hand, you have the Stormy Mirror Force that can just return it back to your hand while clearing out everything else that your opponent has. So again, it's just a lot of synergy with what we already have in the main deck. And the last card that we play is actually going to be 3 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance. Now, Anti-Spell Fragrance actually has a lot of synergy with cards like Denko Sekka, because Anti-Spell Fragrance forces your opponent to essentially set their spell cards that they want to activate for their next turn. And then next turn, you can just drop your Denko Sekka, lock out all of their back row, so they can't activate it at all, and they can't set additional cards, and it's just fantastic for you. Especially, because Anti-Spell Fragrance's main weakness is that your opponent can just set a Mystical Space Typhoon or something, and then on their next turn they could just blow it up. So its effectiveness is very limited, but because you have a Denko Sekka and you can lock them out of even activating those cards, you're going to be very, very safe. And because so many decks are playing things like field spells and all these powerful cards that allow them to go for their combo strings, Anti-Spell Fragrance locks them out of that as well. And because we don't play too much around our spells, this is a fantastic way for us to, again, control the duel in another fashion. Alright, so that does it for all of the side deck cards. Next off, we're going to go into the extra deck. Alright, so for the extra deck, starting off, we're playing 1 copy of Akashic Magician. Now, Akashic Magician is a fantastic card that synergizes so well with this build of Lyrical Lucinias that we have here. So, Akashic Magician, if this card is link summoned, you can return all monsters that this card points to back to the owner's hands. So, what you do when you Kaiju your opponent is actually place your Kaiju in front of an empty extra monster zone that's on the field, so that when you summon your Akashic Akashic Magician, let's say right to this extra monster zone, you can bounce the Kaiju that's right in front of it back to your hand so that you can either Kaiju something else on your opponent's side of the field, or you can save it for another turn. So that's why Akashic Magician is just absolutely incredible in this deck. Also, it's very easy to summon because all it requires is 2 monsters with the same type. So again, our Lyrilusc monsters are all Wind Beast type monsters, and they're really easy for us to swarm the field with. So you can easily just make your Akashic Magician. It even has a down marker so that you can summon additional extra deck monsters here, like, you know, maybe something like a Proxy Dragon, or if you don't want to go for a Link monster, you can just go for your standard XYZ plays, your Assembled Nightingale, your Resized Starlings, and things like that. So yeah, Proxy Dragon's here just in case we do need it. You can summon it under the Akashic Magician, opens up the left and right zone for you to start working with for, again, your other XYZs. Okay, so the next card that we play is 1 copy of Decode Talker. Decode Talker, fantastic card because of its bottom left and bottom right markers, which allow us to open 2 extra zones without the use of, you know, Akashic and Proxy Dragon to do so. But Decode Talker, I would probably replace it. I'll definitely replace it if we get the Wind Link monster available to us in the TCG, or once it just gets released in general. You know, the ones that like Mrs. Radiant, like Mistar Boy and things like that, where it just requires 2 wind monsters, that would be incredible. Anyway, that does it for all of the Link monsters. Next off, we're going to go into the XYZs. So for the XYZs, of course, we have to start off with 3 copies of Lyrilusc Assembled Nightingale. Now, Assembled Nightingale, fantastic card because this card gains 200 attack for every XYZ material that's attached to it. So again, if you have 5 materials attached to it, it gains 1,000 attack. So that's pretty decent because of the following effect, where this card can actually attack your opponent directly, and also this card can make a number of attacks equal to the number of XYZ materials that it has attached to it. So if you have 5 XYZ materials attached to this card, you can attack 5 times for 1,000 damage each, directly to your opponent. So a total of 5,000 damage is just absolutely incredible, and it just puts your opponent down to the zone where if you give them like a Jizukiru or a Thunder King and then you crash into them with a Resized Starling, that's game right there. So this deck can technically still OTK your opponent even without things like Stoic Challenge, just because the way that it functions with crashing into your opponent's stuff with the help of Resized Starling. So yeah, Assembled Nightingale is an incredible card. Now, being the boss monster for the deck, it also has incredible protection effect. So you can detach 1 XYZ material from this card, and then all Lyrilusc monsters that you control cannot be destroyed by battle or by card effects, and you will take no battle damage for that turn. So it's just a great way to help protect not only your monsters, but protect you as well from taking damage, because our monsters are going to be very low in attack points. Okay, so next off, the monster that we play, that we've been referring to throughout this entire deck profile, 3 copies of Lyrilusc Resized Starling. This is the card that makes this deck work. It's the card that makes this archetype function. So Resized Starling, when this card is XYZ summoned, you can actually target 1 face-up monster on the field, and it gains 300 attack and defense for each material attached to this card. So this effect you don't have to boost your own monsters. Of course, you can boost herself, but there's really no point to that. Mostly, you're going to be boosting your opponent's monster by, if you're using 2 materials for this, let's just say you're boosting your opponent's monster by 600 attack. That's just 600 additional damage you're dealing to your opponent when you crash your Resized Starling into them, right? Or you can even boost up something like your Assembled Nightingale, so when your Assembled Nightingale is attacking directly, you're getting more value out of each hit. So it's a very, very good card overall. Now, she also has the effect where you can detach an XYZ material from this card, and then you can add 1 level 1 Winged Beast monster from your deck to your hand. This allows you to search for your Sapphire Swallows, you know, whatever you need at the time. You can even search out DD Crows, and because this is a generic XYZ, a lot of people like playing Spirals will actually use this to search out their DD Crows. But for us, not only do we have our Cobalt Sparrow searching out DD Crows, you also have Resized Starling that could potentially do it as well. So, fantastic utility for this deck, and definitely need to be run at 3, because you're going to go through multiple copies if the duel goes on long enough. Okay, so the next card that we play, we're playing 2 copies of Sylvan Princess Sprite. Sylvan Princess Sprite is a really good card, mostly because of her attack value for a rank 1 monster. It's a 1800 attack, which is pretty strong. So she has the effect where you can detach one XYZ material from this card, excavate the top card of your deck. If it's a spell or trap card, you can add it to your hand. Otherwise, you send it to the graveyard. So Princess Bright is a fantastic card because of the fact that she helps you dig for your instant fusions. She helps you dig for your Harpy's Featherstorm, Solemn Strikes, things like that, while potentially just thinning your deck out of monsters that you don't really need at the time. You know, you can thin out some Lyriluscinias or things like that so that your Kinkabios can bring him back next turn. So there's another layer of synergy there. Okay, so the next card that we play is one copy of Ghost Trick Dullahan. Dullahan is great because it helps us have the attack of one of our opponent's monsters. This is also great for us to help us run over our own Kaijus if we really need to. So you can have the attack of a Kaiju, and then you can just run over it. Dullahan is just fantastic card overall to help us get over big problem monsters. And last but not least for the XYZs, we're running one copy of number 54, Lionheart. Now, even though Resight Starling is here, Lionheart is another potential card that we can go into, mostly because the fact that you don't lose life points when you crash into your opponent's stuff with Lionheart. So Lionheart can't be destroyed by battle if it's in attack position, so that's pretty good. And then when you battle your opponent's monster, you can detach an XYZ material from this card, and instead of you taking the battle damage, your opponent takes all of it instead. So instead of both of you losing an incredible amount of life points when you crash into a Kaiju with your Resight Starling, you can make your Lionheart instead and crash into a Kaiju that way, and your opponent will be taking all the damage. So it's a good card if you're really low on life points and can't afford to go for a draw by crashing into your own Kaijus. Lionheart is a great option that you can go for instead. Okay, so that does it for all of the XYZs. Next off, we're going to go into the fusions. So for the fusions, we only have two of them, but we have one copy of Lyriluscinia, Independent Nightingale. Now, Independent Nightingale, you can just burn your opponent for 500 damage whenever she's on the field, so that's really nice. Just recurring a little bit burn, a little bit extra chip damage, a little bit more pressure on your opponent overall in the duel. But again, your instant fusion, when you summon this card with your instant fusion, it opens up a lot of plays. Now you can use your Sapphire Swallow in your hand to summon additional Lyriluscinias to your side of the field. You can use your Swallow's Nest to bring out a Cobalt Sparrow and then go for digital searches. It's just a fantastic card to have overall because of instant fusion opening up all of these plays for us. Okay, and the next card that we play, the last card, is one copy of Thousand Eyes Restrict, which I mentioned when I was going over the instant fusion. You just take your opponent's card and then use this as either link material or use as XYZ material, whatever you need to do. It just gets rid of something of your opponent's as well along the way, so you're getting more value out of it. So yeah, that does it for the extra deck, and that does it for this deck profile. So thank you all so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, or found it helpful, please leave a like, subscribe for more Lyriluscinia content, and leave a comment down below letting me know what I can do to improve. And until next time, take care.